Welcome to Deep Look, Multiworld's weekly radio show about the current state of Ultimate. I'm the host and the editor, Charlie Eisenhood. Joining me, Multiworld senior editor, Keith Raynor. Keith, vaccine dose number 2 is in my arm.
So you're on the way. Mine is reaching full effectiveness. I'm very close. So I'm happy to hear the good news for you. I'm like 2 days away. Yeah, I think so. Will
you do anything different when you're at full protection after 2 weeks? Interpret that however you want.
Mostly no. I don't think. I can see being like a little more relaxed when I spend time like with my wife's family or something like that. Sure. You know, we've been in situations where we've had to wear masks when we spend our entire time together with the people who are the closest thing to in our bubble. And like, maybe we'll be a little more lax about how that policy works out per se. But otherwise, no, I don't foresee, walking around unmasked, which you mostly can't here in Connecticut. The other thing I would consider is I may look into a gym membership. I think we may have talked. I don't know if we talked about that on air or off air, but I may look into a gym membership. Although taking all the necessary precautions involved in going to a space like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think in public places you're still going to have to wear a mask for who knows how long. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we had to wear masks indoors in public for the rest of this year at least. In Israel, where cases have completely plummeted after they've now vaccinated about 60% of their population, they still have to wear masks in indoor public places. But I just talked to somebody from Israel, and they said that like things feel so much more normal now. People feel comfortable going out in crowds, going to bars and restaurants. I think that I'm almost certainly gonna be willing to go in and like have a beer at a bar. And like, I'll probably be, I'll wear just a surgical mask instead of an N95 when I'm like on an airplane, for example. But it's hard to know. Like, so many people approach it differently too. Like, I think a lot of people are really uncomfortable even going, in being around people at all, even if they're vaccinated, which, I think it's hard not to feel that way at least a little bit when we've had to spend a year avoiding each other, Right. I'm mostly looking forward to being able to like visit family. So
that's of course, I think we've talked about this too, even like the number one thing that we miss being able to do or that we want to do when it's over. And like, with the baby coming, seeing family is important for me. And my sister just had her baby, or now it feels like just because I haven't even met the baby, but the baby was born almost 9 months ago. So, you want to see family and stuff like that. Definitely. I will say my wife, so her birthday is in 2 days, and we went to a nice dinner over the weekend. We wore masks to dinner. All the tables are socially distanced. The place is being ventilated, and we agreed we wouldn't stay there for more than 2 hours. All the servers are gloved and masked, all that kind of stuff. But it was nice to be able to sit down and like for an hour and a half, like feel more normal and eat good food.
to me, that tells me that you're already willing to change behavior a little bit. If you're willing to sit inside and eat at a restaurant, that's one of the benefits, right? Of getting to this point of vaccination where it's like, even after one dose, after 2 weeks, you're 70-ish% protected. Very unlikely to have severe illness at that point. So, I think it's exciting. Like I feel like, Ultimate's about to come back, and some semblance of normalcy is about to come back for a lot of people. And I think as of about 1 week ago from today, everybody in the United States over the age of 16 has access to getting a vaccine. So it looks like we've already seen peak vaccinations as well. So, I think at least here in New York, you can basically walk in at this point into vaccination centers or pharmacies and get a shot if you don't have one already. So, we'll see what that means for the progress that Ultimate takes towards getting back on the field. Today we're going to be talking a little bit later with Tom Manewitz, the college competition manager at USA Ultimate, about the now announced December College Nationals 2021, right before the holidays, Keith, like after college finals and before Christmas, like December, starting around December 18th, 19th. That is going to be a wild experience to have a college nationals at that time of year, presumably in Florida or Texas or Southern California. We don't know the location yet, but looking forward to talking with Tom about that. Like when you saw that, Keith, first of all, I'm sure you at least considered, okay, the Metro East could get multiple bids and we're going to have a shot.
That wasn't necessarily my first thought. My school's been so like out of sorts that it's like hard to imagine the idea that we could even compete to go to nationals. I'm just going to be focused on getting on the field at all. But for others, I can see people who might be in that position. And in the general, like, hey, it's fun that the Metro East might be back to the 2 bid days that we used to when it was an auto bid and I was in school. But it didn't really cross my mind, I can't say.
That's fair. Well, we'll talk more with Tom about that and discuss many of the implications, the combined D1 and D3 championships, what it's all going to look like, size bids coming back for 1 year only. Get them while you can. So we'll talk with him in a moment. The Ultiworld Twitter put out a tweet last week: best locations that you've ever played Ultimate. What's the best place to play? Keith, what comes to mind for you?
Now, I will say that my thoughts are that this is like, I feel like really tied to my experiences at the place. Like for me, one of the first places that came to mind was playing at Amherst Regional High School's fields when I was in high school, playing at the Amherst Invite. And I think a lot of that comes because it had a really great atmosphere at that time. So I don't actually remember I can't even tell you about the quality of the fields per se. I also have some great memories from the soccer complex outside of Atlanta that Atlanta Summer Leagues go to. Sure. Really great quality grass. If I actually want to talk about field quality, just like that perfectly soft but low grass. Those are fields that I enjoy, and even if there's not a lot of amenities, just the quality of the field themselves can be spoken to. What comes to mind for you?
Well, I replied on Twitter. I think some fields that many people are familiar with, which is the Pleasant View Soccer Complex in Boulder, Colorado. There have been many a nationals event there. I don't know if these fields are still commonly used for Ultimate. Like Colorado Cup used to be there, but has since moved to different fields. But I'm telling you, the Pleasant View Soccer Complex, I mean, it doesn't sound exciting, but they're just spectacular fields with beautiful views of the Flatirons in Boulder. There's a field that's kind of like in a bowl with, hills along the side where you can sit and watch showcase games. And there's no question, like, part of it is the atmosphere and experience that you had playing there. So for me, most of the times that I played there high school Western Nationals back in the day when that was a thing. Grub, which is a Boulder summer tournament every year. That's just the best. And I highly recommend, I mean, anybody who lives in Colorado knows Grub. And probably in the Southwest in general. I think I played there probably 4 or 5 times when I was living in Albuquerque. But yeah, just amazing fields. It's also fun to play at altitude. I mean, Albuquerque's also at altitude, but it takes some adjustment, but your throws just go further. Your pulls go further, everything flies a little farther. And so, the deep space opens up that much more when you're at, 6,000 feet.
You hear about it all the time, the altitude across sports. And I don't think I've ever actually thrown in Colorado. So I can't say that I know how much of an advantage or a disadvantage it is, but I know that throwing indoors makes me feel like I'm one of the world's greatest throwers. So maybe in Colorado, you just feel that much better.
You get more distance because the air is thinner, but the disc also tends to hold its line a little bit more and have less flex. So you're not going to get as much fade. You're not going to get as much initial turn on your throws. And I think that can be a difficult adjustment. I mean, anytime you like watch Colorado Cup, the non-Colorado teams are always overthrowing Hucks early every time because it's hard. It's hard. You know, your muscle memory kicks in the game situations, and you end up throwing 5 or 10 yards too far. But yeah, awesome fields. All right, well, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking with Tom Manewitz about the December College Nationals and the Fall College Series coming up. Stay with us. It's Deep Look.
Today's Deep Look is brought to you in part by Elevate Ultimate. Elevate is a youth-focused disc sports organization based out of Vancouver, Canada, that is leading the way in helping kids discover and flourish in disc sports. And they've got a great new book, The Art of Coaching Youth Ultimate, that can help you do the same in your community, from how to recruit kids to how to manage problematic behaviors to running a practice. There's lots of great chapters with great content in the book, including one of my favorites, which is the one about making practices engaging for kids. You can find out more and check out the book for yourself, either by searching The Art of Coaching Youth Ultimate at Amazon or by going to elevateultimate.com and checking under the resources tab. Thanks to Elevate for their support of UltiWorld and Deep Look.
Joining us now on Deep Look is the USA Ultimate College Manager, Tom Manewitz, friend of the show. Tom, welcome back.
Thanks for having me. Hey guys, how you doing?
Well, we're doing pretty good. We were just talking in the intro about the fact that we both have our second vaccine dose. So, you know, on the path to not being, being able to go indoors places and things, see our families.
On the path. I'm very excited. Tomorrow is my 2 weeks past second shot.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Awesome. So you're a couple days ahead of Keith and about a week and a half ahead of me. So
I'm excited for you all to join.
Yes. Yes. So a lot to get to today. We now have an official codified plan for the fall 2021 college series. We talked a little bit on the show before about the conferences and regionals plan, but there was still some question marks about, when was nationals going to be? Now we know, closely anyway, it's going to be either the 17th through the 20th or the 18th through the 21st of December. It's going to be a combined D1 and D3 college championships. First time we've seen that. There's a lot of details to get into here today, but like just big picture, how are you feeling confidence-wise about this series, this nationals taking place now that it's officially on the calendar?
Yeah, so we're definitely optimistic. I think it's probably. I mean, things are looking good if you look at the data in Israel, right? Like things could change. Things could definitely change. You never know. So I don't want to say anything's 100%, but like we are pretty confident. And if things do change, we'll adjust, but now's the time to start planning, and we're excited about what's to come. So that's for sure. Excited to get people back on the field. For that is certain.
What's the first hurdle? What's the first thing that has to get cleared in order to make sure that this event goes off? What's the thing that you're looking at first and foremost?
So I don't know if this is the first hurdle, because I think there's going to be some variance in this, but I have been watching the news pretty intently about what colleges are requiring vaccines. And the more and more schools that require vaccines, the more and more schools are going to trust kids to travel and allow participation off campus. And so far, the news on that is good. Since Rutgers was the first sort of domino to fall, it looks like almost every institution is going to require it in some fashion. Maybe not every institution, but there's going to be a lot of incentive for college students to get vaccinated, and that's pretty big for the series.
What I mean, of course you keep your ear to the ground. What's going on right now with college teams? We're seeing on Twitter some teams, starting to play games, even having a little scrimmage against a local area team or somebody in their state. Some teams practicing in various capacities. But on the other hand, there's also teams that are simply not playing at all. So where do things stand sort of generally in the college division right now?
I mean, I think that's a pretty good description, as teams are a little bit all over the board. I know, that there is practicing. I've seen a couple tournaments happen. They've been local. They've been teams who don't have to stay overnight. I have not seen any overnight travel or heard of any. I know that at least here in Colorado, there's some scrimmaging between teams. The teams that can play each other or have regular testing regimens in their school, and that's sort of a requirement for the other school too. So I think I'm forgetting which schools it was, but in order to participate in some sort of scrimmage, you have to have some sort of assurance that the other team is getting tested as well. So I know that has happened here. But there has been more ultimate being played on the college level, even if it's just teams that haven't practiced. Actually getting out and playing sevens, I think, is more common right now. So it's looking better than it was, certainly. Part of that is you can be outside. I mean,
Right.
especially in the northern parts of the country.
I guess I'm curious, do you have a sense of what the expectations are for the level of participation in a fall or winter series, or is it a projection or an estimation, anything like that? How many teams do you feel like you need to make this all work? Especially when you're getting down to the regional conference level competition. How many teams does USA Ultimate need for this actually to function the way you're hoping?
So I don't think we've gone out in projections. I can kind of give you my general sense. I think we're going to get a lot of teams to play. I mean, the vibe that I have heard and everyone I've talked to is excitement about the fall series. I've started getting emails from organizers about planning tournaments. The reality is, if you're talking about the absolute minimum that you need 16 teams to play a tournament, right? So that could be the bare bones in one division. I mean, I think we will certainly have a fairly robust regionals. I think it's possible that conferences in some areas are going to be lighter attended because we don't know. But we're planning for a full series, right? So we're trying to create the infrastructure for all the teams that existed in 2020 to be able to participate in this fall. That doesn't mean it'll happen. But if we're planning for it, at least we'll be prepared either way. I think it's easier to shrink than it is to grow. So that's sort of the way we're looking at the series.
Sadly, that's true. One of the things that you've done in order to try to deal with that is create very clear incentives for teams to participate by creating 6 size bids, both in D3 and D1, meaning that the regions that have the most teams participating will get a bid for their region, as opposed to the sort of the traditional system of using the rankings to assign strength bids. Now, there are 4 strength bids for the D1 divisions. In the women's division, that's going to go to New England, the Northwest, the Ohio Valley, and the Southwest. In men's, the Atlantic Coast, New England, North Central, and Northwest. And that's based on a weighted average of bids from 27 to 2019, our last 3 full college seasons. Now, I'm sure there were many options discussed on how you were going to do these bids, whether that was, a flat 2 per region in D1, going all size bids, reverting back to 2019, or, using the strength bid system that you used here for all of the bids. What was ultimately the decision point to say we want to have this, at least in D1, this hybrid approach with some strength and some size, and then in D3 saying purely size?
Yeah, so I think so. First of all, recognizing, start from the number of teams in the tournament. That was a big part of the conversation. And there was a conversation about potentially expanding even D3 to get to 20. There's some field site issues with that. There are some in terms of, where can you actually go? Can you find a site that's big enough? And this was before, this was way back in November before, as we started talking about this. So November through January, February, when we started talking about this, before we kind of had any lay of the land of what the fall was going to look like. But ultimately, we realized, there are a couple of things on the D3 side. There are some regions that aren't really big enough to have two bids to nationals. I mean, for a long time, there was one team in the Southwest D3 women's. There was two in 2019. I'm hoping that both come back. And so expanding to 20 in D3, that was one of the challenges there. So, you're looking at a 16-team tournament on the D3 side, and you can't just give two to every region because there are 10 regions. So we did revert back to the size there, and we wanted, on the D1 side, we talked about two per. Just, give everybody two and see how it goes. There are two pieces of that conversation. One, there's some sort of balance to sort of recognize, the existence of like there's a disparate competitive nature between different regions. That was less so. Participation is our number one goal here, right? So the theme for pretty much how we, the thrust of how we decided to write all of the rules for the fall was participation is our number one goal. We want to encourage teams to participate and give them a reason to participate. So that size bid piece doesn't just run for, regionals to nationals, but your conferences to regionals are going to based on the size of your conference as well. So that theme runs the whole way. And then on the D1 side, it's about finding the balance. And you had 6 size bids at D3. So what do you do with the remaining 4? Do you just give them to everybody or have some competitive strength? And we chose strength. I think there's probably some differing opinions out there of what we should have done. But we felt like it was a good balance to try and address concerns that you would have that certainly would come up in regions that wouldn't contend for a size bid.
Somewhat surprisingly to me, I feel like I haven't heard a lot of takes about so far about the current plan or what should have been done differently. Maybe you do like a random drawing, and the bigger size you get, the more entries you get in the drawing. So it still could have gone anyway. Like you're still encouraged to be as big as possible, but some element of complete variance in there for some reason. Were there any wacky ideas or experimental ideas that came up that, you thought were interesting, but ultimately weren't able to make work?
Wacky or experimental? I don't know. I don't think so, in part because, not the entire group. The college working group consists of players who, most of whom, not all of us, have participated in the UPA back in the day, and so we had some sense of what the old system looked like. So I think there was a basis in sort of what used to happen before rankings took over. So the wacky ideas I don't think were thrown out there as much. Unfortunately, I wish I had thought of them just for the conversation. I'd be curious to see where that would go. Nothing like that was discussed in terms of. I will say, and maybe this is, we're thinking about crazy things we can do with seeding when it gets to nationals. There's a conversation there about what that's going to look like.
Tell us what kind of crazy things we're talking about.
Well, we have talked about, and nothing is 100%, but we have talked about like the idea of doing a World Cup draw type thing.
Ooh,
I was hoping that's where you were going to go with this.
But it's nothing's confirmed, but it is something we're considering pretty heavily because we won't have a comparison point. There's no regular season. There's no rankings. There's nothing to go off of, and these teams are going to look a lot different than they did at the end of 2020. That's for sure.
So would you assign pool, like, I guess you give the strength bid earners?
I have no idea.
The top spots from those regions?
No idea.
Okay. I won't go down the rabbit hole, but I'm intrigued. I think there's a good argument to be made that that's how seeding should be done at all national championship tournaments, given that the rankings can be a little shaky down the board sometimes. Anyway, let's see. Eligibility changes. This is a big part of this event. It's kind of anything goes. If you were in college in the last 5 years, come on down. You can play. So people who graduated anytime between April 1st, 2020 and June 30th of this year, so basically if you were a senior or fifth year and you graduated at any point during the pandemic, more or less, will be able to participate if their school allows it to happen. Academic eligibility requirements have also been reduced. It looks like you only have to be taking one full-time course and be enrolled in a degree-seeking program. So even if you're just taking one class, that's enough to be able to play in this event. Now, this is not the standard for a typical spring college championship. I assume, given what you've said so far, this is still just about maximizing participation. Have there been any other thoughts on this eligibility front? And what are you hearing right now from teams, or maybe even more specifically from colleges, on what they're going to allow? That's going to be the big question mark.
Yeah, so there's a lot built into that question. So
yes,
let me take.
I just asked like 5 questions. I'm sorry.
Yeah, let me like take the first thing, the first piece of it, or at least as I understood the question, is in terms of talking about eligibility and like the theme is yes, participation, right? That is the goal. A lot of students have had their schedules completely disrupted by the pandemic. Their academic schedules have changed, and we want to give them an opportunity to participate. For graduated students, like especially, right, like we've all played College Ultimate. We know that like College Ultimate becomes the center of your college experience, and something that USA Ultimate like takes a lot of pride in. That like this is something that people love and care so much about. So we wanted to find a way to give people that last opportunity to play. I should say that June 30th is to account for spring graduation. There are instances that we've heard of since the rules were published that I'll be honest, we didn't account for in our conversations, where a student is sort of forced to take a summer program to graduate. If that's the case, please email us. Like we want to include some of those students as well. So it's just something I think we should be out there publicly, is if like there's a summer graduation for somebody who, for academic reasons, for pandemic reasons, there's probably going to be room to include those students as well. So yes, participation. The second question, if I'm now I'm blanking, Charlie, can you hit me with
what are you hearing from colleges on whether they're going to allow this or not?
So I have talked with a good chunk of universities. As it is, I think there is definitely, it's disparate around the board. There are some colleges that have absolutely no problem with it. You sign a waiver, you're a graduated student, alumni, totally fine. You can participate in club sports. Those colleges exist. Those tend to be bigger state schools where they have alumni in club sports programs already. That's not the case everywhere, but I've also talked to schools where they're okay with it so long as their school budget doesn't go towards non-students, right? So they're like, that's fine, but you're going to have to show that this money didn't go towards these students. And there are some that are just like, look, don't like, we're not going to say no, but this student can't be on our club sports forms. And I think there's a difference. But then there's also sort of this fourth world out there where it's like, if you're representing our school at all, you have to be a student. In which case, those are the schools that I think are going to be out of luck.
Have you heard of a school that's doing that?
Last I talked to, I would say I haven't talked to them recently. I had a lot of these conversations with more schools back in the spring when we were talking about doing it for a December nationals, when before we knew what the pandemic was going to happen, what was going to happen with the pandemic. Most of the schools I've talked to, at least in 2021, have said they're going to look to find a way to do it. Or I was talking to the University of Wisconsin, and their club sports director said that the lacrosse team does something similar to this, and they find a way where there are alumni that participate with one of their club lacrosse teams at an event, and like they sort of disaggregate who's an alum and who's a current student. So what I would say to team managers who are listening to this is like, talk to your club sports departments, figure out what is and is not allowed. Like if they're if they are okay with other people participating on a roster outside of the university, like that's okay. We're not trying to be restrictive. Like this rule is, in some ways, it's not that different. Like you're going to need permission from your own school to participate with your school generally. It's not that different. But it is really important because we want to protect like schools from themselves. The worst case scenario is that people play with students the club sports department did not allow it, and you get a team suspended for the spring. Like that is the one thing we are trying to avoid at all costs.
Right.
When even though we want to open this up, like we want teams to understand that there are consequences if they don't follow their school rules, and that's a big part of it. There will also be a mechanism for us to reach out to schools to find out as well. So USA Ultimate will have the ability to enforce it.
Don't let that be you, folks. Don't be that team. We don't want to have to write that story about your club. We don't want to, but we will. So don't do it. You mentioned a number of times the focus on participation, and I harbor some pretty serious concerns about the teams that we don't talk about a lot. The teams that are trying to put together a roster for conferences, and maybe they go to a tournament or two. Teams with a lot of turnover, in particular in the women's division, where I think that in general roster numbers are much smaller and there's a lot less institutional leadership. And a lot of those teams, I think you would never hear from. They don't even have the infrastructure to contact you to express potentially that they are concerned. How do you help those teams? Does USA Ultimate have something in place to help keep these teams together, whether it's resources for captains, or could we see looser consortium rules so that programs that are kind of on the brink can join up with each other? What does USA Ultimate have in place to help these teams?
So that's a great question. So first, I would say that is a large portion of the loosening of the eligibility rules, so that like they can get to that critical mass. Those teams can get to that critical mass in the fall, and then if they can participate in a series, then they have a recruiting cycle. So that there's like the structural stuff that we've already talked about. That's a big part of it. I think going forward, like we're going to try and be a resource to teams on the administrative side as much as we possibly can. So that'll mean a couple webinars coming up in May. Those will probably be repeated in the spring. From a resource, from a resource or membership standpoint, I think that's a little bit tougher. Like that's an area that it's a harder to help teams with. I will add, we're also trying to help teams on the graduated student level, and we're in the middle of drafting a letter that teams can bring to their club sports departments to sort of support non-student participation. So those are some of the things. I don't know if that catches all of it. I wish I had more time to dive in and work with schools before I leave USAU this summer, but I think that's where our focus really is.
I think that some people have been very curious to know if D1 and D3 combined college championships is going to be a model for the future, and if this is going to be something that we see going forward. Is that the case?
So I think right now, so first of all, this is going to be a big experiment. So the answer might be we will see. If this goes well, it very well could be. I don't think it's in the plans right now, but it has actually been discussed in the last few years, especially since we started doing the US Open. It's been discussed more seriously, where we've started seeing bigger events for USA Ultimate and doing bigger events. For a long time, the conversation was about field sites and restrictions, and that is true. The other thing that is true is that the timing constraints of the fall actually kind of pushed us in this decision, right? Like think about in the spring, you get to graduation, you get to the end of the semester, and then it's the summer, and you have multiple weekends to work with. Here, our window to do a national championship is pretty small, at least in 2021. So it made sense to actually put the 2 weekends together. The answer is I don't know yet. I think it's in 2022. I don't believe it's likely. I know we're still trying to figure out where. We haven't quite figured out where nationals is, or if we have, I don't know all the details. So it's possible that it's already been determined. So I think 2022 is unlikely, but if 2021 combined goes well, it's possible. Certainly.
Are there other components in this kind of experimental plan for this fall that you see potentially being a part of USA Ultimate's future, even though you may not specifically be there to enact it? Yeah. But are there things that you have your eye on? You're like, oh, I think this really could be something that we apply in future college seasons.
I mean, well, the rostering, digital rostering, this is another experiment. If it goes well, email rostering. So we're no longer doing the paper route. The hope is to make that make that like happen in the spring too. So that's a big one. I think a lot of, it's funny. I think any former college captain that has had to mail their roster, like understands that plight. I think the leadership coming in who hasn't had to deal with that might not know.
Or if you listen to our podcasts in the fields, you probably heard stories of people driving 13 hours through the night or whatever to try and drive their roster in.
Yeah, we still see that a little bit. I think teams understand the mail exceptions a little better now, but I have had teams from Boulder or from Fort Collins drive down to get it in before the deadline for sure. But yeah, so I think that's a big one. The reason we can do that now, and this is, this goes kind of way back. The reason we can do things like that now is that we have somebody in-house doing web development work. Like that's a big, I think that's one of the big institutional changes that USA Ultimate made in 2018, hiring Kristen, who has been amazing for us as an organization that people will not see, but it allows things like that to happen. It allows us to sort of change the way we interact with our backend system in a way that's positive, and will help everyone kind of going forward. There's still some emailing. It's not perfect. There's no way to like do it directly through our system, but it's better than it was for sure.
So where is this tournament going to be held in December?
I can't say yet. We'll know soon, but I can't say yet.
I had to ask.
I know you want to know, Charlie.
I do. I really want to know.
It's coming soon. That's our hope.
Is the fact that there's two sets of dates mean that there's two potential venues and you're still picking between them?
I'm just not going to say. I'm just not going to say.
I'm just here so I don't get fined. Okay. So if you're a college team, let's say I'm a college team and I'm trying to figure out what I should do today or like before the end of this semester, as you know, we're getting there to the end, a couple weeks left for most colleges before everybody goes home for summer. What should I be doing to try to get ready for this besides, practicing if I can and that sort of thing?
Yeah. So, when most teams interact with the USAU, like we're interacting with them on an administrative level, right? And like getting your team ready now. So picking leadership for the fall and spring is super important. Putting in charge, who is going to be in charge of like dealing with the roster, right? That's the stuff that, you need to be doing. And then the other thing is like we need to make sure that USA Ultimate can communicate with the person who's supposed to be in charge. Because when we get to August, September, those timelines are really short. They're much shorter than normal. And so I'm like almost going to like request, encourage, bribe. I don't even know. Like, please, if you are the team manager of a team, please set your team up in your system now and put the person who's supposed to be in charge as the team manager. Like that's like probably the single most important thing to do right now is like either roll over your team from 2020 or create a new team in the system and then assign whoever the captain or team manager or team president, whoever that is, make them the team manager. Because there's going to be a lot of communication coming from HQ, a lot of communication coming from volunteers, sort of towards the tail end of the, like coming, mid to tail end of the summer, all the way through that first deadline to sign up, which is September 24th. So that's like the most important. And that September 24th deadline, it's basically as if we're asking teams to sign up for conferences in January, something we don't do. So like, if you think about it that way, those timelines are tight. And with a lot of people who don't know what they're doing because they've never been in leadership because we've missed a year, trying to get prepared for that now is really important.
Is there going to be an asterisk on college nationals in the fall?
Man, I
this
think
is
it's
an official
national...
USAU position, by the way.
No,
whatever you say,
it's not. Absolutely not. I think there's going to be a nationals and it's going to be great. I'm really excited for people to play. Like I think that's the most important thing. Like regardless of you can have a conversation. I'll let you decide. I'll let the media decide if there's an asterisk. I think the kids who win this title are going to be pretty excited about it. I don't know. I wonder if anyone's going to have the LeBron opinion, like the bubble, right? Like it's actually a harder one to win. Who knows? Somebody could have that opinion. But we'll see. I don't really have an opinion on it. I just am excited that there's going to be something that's I think it's going to be awesome. I think it's going to be an awesome event that people are excited to go to and play in. And I'm excited that college kids have something to look forward to that's big this fall, when it's been so long since we've played.
Absolutely. Looking forward to having Ultimate back, certainly, and certainly College Ultimate, which is like my favorite, probably my favorite part of Ultimate. Although I think you may find that folks at USA Ultimate are going to have to tackle this question eventually, because when it comes to deciding, does this count for a team's record, or if you miss nationals this year, does it count against your streak of qualifying for nationals? Like, I know USAU keeps track of that stuff somewhere. So
I personally do not. So I'm going to let whoever is in charge of that, make that choice.
So
that's such a terrible non-answer. Sorry.
Well, we'd love to have you back on for our subscriber bonus segment and get some of your stories about your time at USA Ultimate, because you're going to be leaving in a few weeks. I think a lot of people in the college division are super grateful. How long have you been at the organization now? Is it like 5 years?
5.5 years. So I started in December of 2015. So 2016 was my first college nationals in Raleigh. It's been awesome, to be honest.
What are you doing next?
Next, it's return to Minnesota, which is become my home. I grew up in New York City, but Minnesota is definitely like where most of my friends and sort of life exists. And I'm going back to my law career. So starting by clerking for a judge, and then gonna go from there, back to being a lawyer. It has, which is not as fun as running College Ultimate, but it is something I'm excited about for sure.
That's great. Well, we'll see you in the subscriber bonus segment, and looking forward to hearing some of your stories.
Yep, sounds good.
All right, thanks very much. Tom Manewitz, college manager at USAU, with us here on Deep Look. And hey, folks, conferences start in October, so deadlines are already on their way. So be prepared. Check out all of the information and guidelines on the USA Ultimate website. There's a story up on Ultiworld with links as well. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Deep Look. Thanks again to Tom for coming on the show. Join us for our sub bonus with him, where he talks a little bit about U24s, his favorite and worst college nationals memories, and more. So looking forward to chatting with him there. Keith, as you take a look at this, college championships plan, what comes to mind? I mean, we got dates now, still don't have a location, but we're going to have this whole series starting in October. And I know that, teams are going to approach this very differently. We talked to the UNC players a couple weeks ago here on the show, and they're thinking about winning that tournament. Whereas a lot of teams are just going to be thinking about, can we field a team? So there's going to be a wide range of things as we kind of get back into this, into the swing of College Ultimate. But, from a high level perspective, are you a fan of the way that this tournament has been set up and what the plan is?
If we can play safely, I mean, I have the same misgivings I had in the beginning, but I understand that there were going to be some negatives. This is not an ideal situation. And so, do I think that size bids, usually would probably favor a region like the Metro East, where there are a bunch of small schools? But if there are a bunch of schools that are like, oh, A, we can't field a team, or B, what are we going to do playing in December or whatever, and there's less participation in November and September or whatever because of the weather, does that maybe favor teams in warmer climates that have been able to stick together? Sure. But I think we just kind of have to accept that as a reality of the situation and say, like, okay, I'm okay with this. I think the other big thing for me from this conversation in general with Tom is that, A, when you respond as a College Ultimate player or fan or whatnot, an organizer, and you see the plan and you think, oh, here's the problems I have with this plan because it doesn't serve me in this way, it's important to think that there are other parties that have a different interest and perspective. And to hear Tom focus so much on participation, I think that's a big component of this. And I imagine a lot of people's first thought, especially if you're one of the elite competitive teams, is competition should be the priority. That's our priority. How come it's not the priority of the structure? How come the structure doesn't give the most important balance for competition? Well, because that's not what it's built for. It's built to encourage participation. And sure, is competition going to be a big component? Yes. But it's not the foremost priority of the plan. And I think that's something that is illuminating to think about, because it clarifies the thought processes behind the system that's in place.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about the bid approach. They weighted the average so that 2019 was more potent. I think it got 50% of the weight, and then it was, scaled back down through for 2018 and 2017. I think that makes a lot of sense, especially in college where there's more variation from year to year, rewarding regions that were good in 2019 with a bid now and making it just 4 regions. In a lot of ways, it makes sense. Like when you look at the regions that were selected for strength bids through this, this algorithmic approach, basically, those are the regions that are going to come to mind when you're thinking about the strongest college regions. So in that sense, I think they've addressed the primary competitive, element here, which is that what you don't want to have happen is, Southwest Women's to get 1 bid. I mean, not that that would happen. I think they're probably going to get a size bid because there's just so many schools in California. But, now they're guaranteed to get 2 through this system. And, if you can't finish top 2 in your region, then are you really, like a team that was going to have won nationals?
we had this argument in our Discord.
Right. And like to some extent, you have to make choices. Doing a pure strength bid approach on the past seasons doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense, given that, we're now 2 years later, team composition's totally different. You have people who've graduated and whatnot. So I don't know. To me, this finds a good balance between like competitive fairness and rewarding areas, for getting people back and playing, which of course will be the goal. Now, yes, I mean, you already kind of addressed this. Like there's a baked in assumption to all of this that travel will be possible, that it will be safe to have a large scale national tournament in December. And I do think, given the current projections of vaccinations in the United States, that is a very reasonable goal, particularly as Tom was talking about with the vaccine policies that schools are putting in place. I think that in really like 4 weeks, 6 weeks tops, we're going to see a big drop off in cases. That's what we saw in Israel. They're at 60% vaccinations. We're at about 40% vaccinations in the United States. And there's probably going to be some regional variation, but I think we're going to be at a point where, traveling to a tournament that's played outdoors is going to be very reasonable. I'm not even talking about December. I'm talking about in like 2 months. And, that's what we've heard from some of the folks on the public health guidance that are helping USA Ultimate make decisions about, the club season. There's a reason that USAU is comfortable scheduling TCT tournaments in July. We don't know what the exact trajectory is going to be, but I think we can look at what we understand about the vaccines. We can look at what's happened in countries that have, they're a little ahead of us in vaccination and feel confident that, a December college nationals is going to be a reasonable thing to do.
Surely. And I think it's reasonable. You would need a setback, I think, to disrupt the trajectory. You would need a case spike, a variant, or something like that to take us off the path towards being in a safe place to play by the end of the year, I would say, from my understanding. But going back to kind of what Tom was talking about participation, and I feel like championing is a strong verb for me talking about my concerns about smaller college programs, but fighting for, I guess, these smaller college programs. And maybe one of the takeaways here is, if you are thinking about, should I go to grad school at this elite competitive university and maybe I'll make the team and like we'll be really good because I have my 6th and 7th year or whatnot, whatever year you're in. Maybe what you should think about to help your team is to go to a school in your team's region to help them get a size bid and keep that team together. Really do think college programs should be thinking about how can we help the programs in our region, and now they have an actual incentive to do that. It used to be back in my day. I'll back in my day, everybody out there. You did actually think about, okay, how can I get more teams to my conference, because then my conference gets more bids to regionals. Now, I don't know if a lot of higher level teams even think about that, because they're probably going to win their conferences walking away, so it doesn't matter. But now there's something to it. Like, you should be trying to help teams in your region field teams. I'm not talking about the old school, like calling and emailing and trying to see if you can get teams to set up a B team on the fly. I'm talking like really substantial, leadership help to make sure the teams survive, because it matters for the greater ecosystem here.
Let's take a second and talk about this, because, USAU and what Tom just described, right? They're making incentive changes and some policy changes that will make the environment more conducive to teams existing in the fall, right? Because not only do you have the carrot of having a series basically to compete in, you have reduced eligibility requirements, you have a more expansive policy for letting alumni play with the team, and you have a much softer approach to bids with the size bids. So there's like a lot of carrots to playing. So that's fine and good, and it is good. But I think, Keith, you're getting at this a little bit. What should we do? I use we as like a general sport term, whether that's USAU or you and me, college teams, local organizers. What should we be doing to try to make sure that these smaller college programs, like your own, are going to be able to return and thrive, right? Not just make it back for one fall nationals thing that kind of slaps together with 14 players, but, gets back on the path towards having an A and a B team, towards, competing for the win at regionals, the things that we generally measure college programs by. What do you think we should do?
Well, in an ideal world where the conference coordinators and regional coordinators were compensated in a way that made it feasible, I would love for them to be kind of the connective tissue, for them to be reaching out to captains right now. But I'm wary of volunteer burnout, and I don't think it's fair to pile on that responsibility. So I think we as a community can step into that role, particularly if you're someone who's already really bought in and benefits from a lot of infrastructure in your programs. So if you are a part of a team like that, proactively reach out to the teams that are in your conference. And you could do that through the conference coordinator. You could say, hey, can we send an email, or can you provide the emails for the other captains? Ask them, hey, how are things looking for y'all? What kind of stuff, what kind of trouble are you running into? Initiate those conversations so that people are aware of what's going on in the schools around them with the captains around them. Because if there are going to be a lot of teams, I think, that have brand new captains this year who are walking into kind of a hornet's nest of a really complex situation. And like Tom mentioned, tighter deadlines to figure this stuff out.
And without the typical trickle down of, here's how we do things. Here's what I did. Here's what you should do.
So you may have someone on your team who's already well versed in, how to run the team's financials or how to submit your roster. And the teams that you talk to, they may say, oh, we're trying to teach somebody new how to do that. And you can offer, oh, hey, why don't we set up a Zoom call with this person? And they can kind of like walk through how we set up our roster. Like, that stuff doesn't offer you any competitive disadvantage. And right now, in fact, offers you competitive advantage. So like, you can literally help your team be more successful by taking this path. But, I don't know how far we can extend this. Would I love to see teams potentially doing combined practices if they need to, or sharing resources with each other? Like, yes, I hope that's what happens. If it's helpful for you to send your captains or coach to some other school, if you're allowed to help them plan a practice or whatnot, let's do that. The community approach to me feels like the right path. And that can be localized, and that can have long-term benefits for your Ultimate community, whether it be more players or just a greater connectivity between you and the teams that you see at conferences, that you see at regionals, people who may be your future club teammates. These things I think have sort of trickle down effects that they ripple out into the community, and I think can make us a better, stronger community as a whole when we come back.
And what I'll throw out there is that, we need coaches. External leadership for these college programs makes an enormous difference. There's a lot of schools out there that are, captain run, even today. Now, of course, when we talk about the top level teams that we typically discuss on this show, sure, we're talking about teams that often have multiple coaches, because that's the kind of, institution and team that they've built, that they have people who graduate and want to remain involved with the program. But there's a lot of schools out there that don't have that. And I think that, you think about like college athletics in general, let's just say college basketball, for example, or you pick your sport, right? These are obviously multi-million-dollar sports that have, tons of money going to coaches and whatnot. But like, there's a whole system in place. And like, when you see an interview, it's often with the coach. The coach is setting the tone of what the practices are going to be like and how things are going to go. And I'm not saying we need to be there, and we're never going to get there to that kind of extent where there's, 6 assistant coaches and that kind of thing. But having that leadership that doesn't change every year, that doesn't turn over like college teams do, that's super important. So I think we, as again, back to the royal we here, I hope that people can say, I would love to try to help by coaching. I also think USA Ultimate should be finding more ways to incentivize coaching by creating money availability to those that coach.
Ulti-bucks.
And yeah, but like, whatever it is, like, it's nice to have these eligibility incentives, and that's great. And it's in many ways, it's a lot easier to implement than something like, a multi, dozens of thousands of dollars in funds that you can allocate to those who are coaching and not getting paid to do it. I think simplifying the process and encouraging coaching in the college division is a crucial step. Like, something that's already been sort of organically happening, but it feels like right now we really need to try to grease the wheel.
And maybe, this maybe hit somebody's ears and they're like, oh yeah, I can help coach. And maybe you're tempted to go be the third assistant coach at your program. But maybe it's time to ask, like, would I do more good going to this small program that I know is struggling to make regionals and help them, rather than be the fourth coach for a team that's vying for a national championship or whatever, that already has captains who've been playing Ultimate for 8 years, and already can run a practice. I think that it's tempting to do what's comfortable and what's maybe the most fun for you, would be competing for a national championship and to coach with your friends. But maybe it's time to say, like, okay, there's something bigger than that necessary. And is it tough to ask people to make sacrifices like that? Sure. But we already rely a ton on volunteers to do way too much work. So maybe the rest of us can step up a little bit.
Raise prices, find money to give to those who coach in those kinds of smaller programs that aren't being able to be supported by the college or institution or the team. We got to think about this from an economic perspective, in my opinion. And, the volunteerism issue is becoming very obvious right now, because you talk about burnout normally, that's always an ongoing problem. And it's especially a problem after, a pandemic. It's just so hard to like maintain the motivation. Anyway, let us know your thoughts. I forgot actually, and maybe we should have the editor go back and edit this part into earlier in the show when you first asked the question. Obviously, the thing that we need to be doing is buying more Ultiworld subscriptions for teams that really need the help. We need full team subs. You got to get everybody individual subscriptions. That'll really
help the division. So make sure that we're doing, the only way to save College Ultimate, I think, is to subscribe to Ultiworld.
Wow. Some people are going to take that seriously and think you're a real jerk, Keith. They're going to think you're a real jerk.
What if they're not wrong? You know, they might not be wrong.
All right. Well, let us know your thoughts at DeepLookPod on Twitter, deeplook@ultiworld.com. Thanks for tuning in. For Keith Raynor, I'm Charlie Eisenhood saying so long, and we'll talk to you next week right here on Deep Look.